Hello, and welcome to the Magic of Calvin and Hobbes, a fan celebration. My name is Ryan, and I am a self-proclaimed Calvin and Hobbes superfan and expert.
And my name is also Ryan, although most people call me Indy.
As we continue our celebration of 40 years of Calvin and Hobbes, we now ask ourselves the question, where does Calvin live? Now, before we answer that question, we always have our usual disclaimers. We don't own the rights to Calvin and Hobbes. We're not affiliated with Bill Watterson or his syndicate, so we can't put any of the strips that we discuss up on our YouTube channel or anything like that. But we can make a blog post with the dates of publication, so you can look it up on Go Comics if you have a subscription, and the books that they're in with the page numbers, so you can look it up there if you have the books. All right, so before we jump into the episode, we have an email. And this one is a second email from someone. So you remember Graham emailed us before about giving a speech on Calvin and Hobbes in high school and such.
Yeah.
So he writes to us again. He says, "Hi, Ryan and Indy. I loved the episode on Rosalind. I think my favorite arc with her is the one at the end where she plays Calvin Ball, which I love." So I agree, Graham. That's a fantastic one. And I remember specifically reading that one when it was in papers. He also says, "I've also wondered, as someone who was not alive when the strips aired in papers, do you think people anticipated the end of Calvin and Hobbes coming when Bill put an end to Calvin and Rosalind? I mean, from now on, Calvin and Rosalind are just going to play Calvin Ball every time she comes over. So do you think anyone saw the end coming? Further bulletins as events warrant, Graham." So
Another nice
excellent.
reference.
Yeah, excellent reference there, Graham. But I responded, but I'll go ahead and say it here too.
Sure.
So the announcement that Calvin and Hobbes was going to end came on November 9th, 1995. And these Rosalind strips ran in September of 1995. So I can tell you for my part, I did not see it coming at all. I was completely shocked when I found out that Calvin and Hobbes was ending. My brother told me when I got home from school, and I thought he was messing with me. He's my older brother. I thought he was just, trying
Yeah.
to make me panic or something.
That sounds
And
like a cruel prank, doesn't it?
yeah, exactly. And so, but then he showed me the announcement in the newspaper, and I was just crushed and shocked and, just didn't know how to react. So my answer to that question is no. The Rosalind arc did not give me any sense that the end was coming. Indy, what was your experience?
Yeah, I guess mine was kind of similar to yours in that I don't remember speculating or thinking, oh, I wonder if we're winding down here. It was just reading the announcement that it was going to end and being like, oh, really? Oh, man. So, yeah, just being so disappointed. I mean, I don't know that I specifically remember reading the Rosalind strips in the paper. I mean, the Rosalind playing Calvin Ball strips in the paper. I probably did, but I could see people thinking maybe that's the last Rosalind strip, or being like, well, what's really going to top this, or where does it go from here? But I don't know that that would translate necessarily into thinking, oh, maybe the strip itself is coming to an end. Some people might, but like you said, I certainly didn't have any sense that that might happen until hearing the sad news, actually, when it was announced.
Yeah, and I mean, when it was announced, I was still pretty young. I was a kid, in elementary school and stuff. So I wonder if adults maybe saw the writing on the wall. I sure didn't. But,
Well,
I mean, I even could say, well, what if next time Susie is involved somehow and Calvin and Hobbes have to get rid of two slimy girls or, whatever. There could have
that
been
was
ways.
hilarious, actually. Like,
Yeah.
well, Susie did have to stay at Calvin's house one time when her mom wasn't home or something. So, yeah, it's not outside the realm of possibility. It's like, well, we'll have Rosalind babysit two kids instead of one. So,
Right. Yeah. So, something like that could have happened. Anyway, suffice to say, it completely blindsided me.
yeah, me too. Yeah, it's an interesting question, Graham. I want to say too, like, I agree with you that in a lot of ways, that's kind of my favorite Rosalind strip, just because I think we talked about this a little bit in the episode. That's when things finally go right. So,
Yeah.
both of them kind of lay down their arms, and it's like, whoa, we actually can have a good time together if we try to, or maybe stop trying so hard. And then that's when
Yeah.
it does work. So, yeah, that's a wonderful arc for a send off for Rosalind, if nothing else. But yeah, I don't know whether people thought that was a harbinger of the end of the strip.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like in retrospect, I can kind of see, okay, yeah, that's a good point. They have a good babysitting experience. Are we really going to go back to Calvin trying to mess with her? But at
Mm.
the time, it did not occur to me at all.
No, I would say just one more thing about this. So before Calvin and Hobbes ended, I mean, in one sense, this is going to sound obvious, right? Like you might think, well, this could just go on sort of in perpetuity. Yeah, obviously. But there's also other examples of this, right? So like peanuts were around when our parents were children, and then they were still being produced, even news strips while Calvin Hobbes was going on. So I
And
think a
after
lot of
even,
yeah, even after. So I think a lot of people probably maybe even subconsciously might have assumed, oh yeah, I mean, this is probably the most popular comic strip in the world. This is the next Peanuts. It's going to be running for decades to come. I mean, I don't know that I thought that consciously, but I might have sort of assumed that, or someone asked me, oh, how long do you think it'll run? It's like, oh, well, probably forever. I mean, maybe
pass it on to his kids. That's what cartoonists do, right?
yeah. So yeah, I think probably a lot of people were taken by surprise for this. Maybe there were some people who thought they saw it coming or predicted the end, but yeah, I don't recall hearing any speculation about that.
Yeah, me either. Well, thank you, Graham, for the email. We always appreciate hearing from you. We love hearing from everybody who wants to communicate with us.
Yeah. So thanks, Graham. Keep watching or listening. Watch or listen, whatever.
We got the YouTube channel.
That's true.
Now, recently we talked to Jenny Robb, and she pointed out that the comic strips Crazy Cat and Pogo both take place in real world locations. And in that episode, we all agreed that Calvin and Hobbes also probably takes place somewhere real, and that we'd address that in another episode. This is that episode. So here we go. And we thought it would be fun to go through the clues one by one in Calvin and Hobbes about the setting, and that maybe we'd start broad and narrow in. So let's start with the broadest place possible, the universe.
That is pretty broad.
It's hard to go broader than that. We're not going to do the multiverse. I'm sorry, listeners. Well, we may touch on it a little bit, but we're going to really try to narrow in on our universe. So we're pretty confident that Calvin lives in the same universe as us, and here are the clues. First, there's a strip where Calvin is being the human light particle, and he says, "Nothing in the universe is faster than Calvin, I hope."
I
So,
hope.
yeah. So he lives in a universe where nothing can go faster than light, we think, and that sounds a lot like our universe. He also refers specifically to the Big Bang a couple of times. In one case, they're time traveling, and he says if they miss their exit, they could fly right into the Big Bang. And then in my favorite, he says that scientists come up with all these wild ideas, but they come up with these dumb, boring names for them, and he's selling scientific names for $1 each. And he comes up with a better name for the Big Bang.
Exactly. And you remember what it is?
Of course, the horrendous space kablooey.
Exactly, the horrendous space kablooey. And on a brief personal note, I remember specifically correcting someone else about that on a forum one time, not a dedicated Calvin and Hobbes forum, but like the off-topic forum for something else where this came up. And they made a reference to this and said the name wrong. I said, "Oh, surely you mean the horrendous space kablooey." And the person was like, "Oh yeah, that's right, thanks," or something. So yeah, just kind of fun fact. We've even before the podcast, we were talking about this kind of thing online with various people. So
Yeah. And Hobbes says that that would be better. And I agree. And they say that they should lobby to change that. So if anyone, has an in with like the International Astronomical whatever, I think you should lobby for that.
and
But
since there is a part on the Stegosaurus called the Thagomizer now, which came from a
right.
Far Side strip, there is a precedent for comic strips informing scientific terminology. So
Yeah.
I
And
think we're
just
on
to be
good
clear,
standing here.
yeah, just to be clear, when Indy says thagomizer is a thing, that's the spike end of a stegosaur's tail. That gets brought up in academic papers and stuff. Like it's a legitimate scientific term, basically.
Yeah, it
So
really did come from that. Also, on
yeah,
a semi-similar note, there's a Sonic Hedgehog is actually a
yep.
scientific name derived from the Sega character. So yeah, this actually pop culture can and does inform what things are named in science.
Yeah. So horrendous space kablooey. In that same strip, he also says Tyrannosaur should be monstrous killer death lizard. So, it's another thing to consider.
Oh, for sure. Now, I was going to say, to be fair with that one, I mean, that's not so far off. I mean, so
Yeah.
dinosaur is kind of like,
Yeah, it means terrible lizard.
yeah, terrible lizard, and then Tyrannosaurus Rex is like king tyrant.
Yeah, tyrant
So
lizard king.
yeah, so it's not he's not actually that wrong, and the Latin names kind of do this. It turns out you sound really smart when you know the scientific names for some things, but sometimes they just sound like really common descriptions if you translate them. So I don't know, just
Yeah.
something I think is funny sometimes.
I think Tyrannosaur is a perfectly good name. Everyone knows it. It's great. Just a fun story. According to certain schools of thought and the way that scientific names are given precedence, there was a case to be made that Tyrannosaurus should actually be superseded by the name Manospondylus gigas because someone named a fossil that not knowing that it was Tyrannosaurus rex before Tyrannosaurus was actually named. But the International Zoological something something ICZN, I can't remember what the name is. The normal rule is whatever gets named first is what it is. That's why there's Apatosaurus versus Brontosaurus.
Okay.
But the ICZN, when they realized that, basically said, "No, we're not doing that." So,
Man, I can go back and forth on that. I agree. Tyrannosaur is a really cool name, but hopefully I'll say this right. You said something like Manospondylus gigalis. Was that it? That sounds
Manospondylus gigas.
Manospondylus gigas. That does sound kind of awesome too. So
Yeah, but
I don't know,
nobody's going to
listeners,
replace Tyrannosaurus.
yeah, I don't want to replace it, but that is a cool name. Maybe we could get it like an AKA or
Yeah, it's like a junior synonym they call it. But yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But it's almost, I know it's not really like this, but it kind of reminds me of the old Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner cartoons where they give the fake scientific name, like the coyote was
Oh yeah,
Hungrius Maximus.
right.
So
Yeah.
wow.
Anyway,
What was the
returning
podcast
to
about
our
again? Yeah.
yeah. So we get the sense that Calvin lives in a universe that's believed to have originated with a big bang, like ours is. And in a similar strip, Calvin also criticizes scientists for conceiving of the universe being full of a dark, invisible mass that they call dark matter. So he's again selling scientific names, and uh, Hobbes mentions that he likes to say quark, also a scientific name.
Yeah, and funnily enough, this is not super far off from how the term quark came to be in the first place. And so I don't remember the exact details, but as I understand it, when they were trying to come up with a name, there was this line of like nonsense from a poem or a story that goes 3 quarks for Muster Mark, and then whoever was involved in naming this liked that word, and that's where it came from.
All
So
right.
yeah, scientists sometimes just take a word they like the way it sounds, and then that becomes the name of something.
For any of our listeners who aren't scientists, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Scientists are huge dorks, and we like to do dorky things. So we
And
might actually be able
that's
to get
awesome.
her into, yeah, we might be able to get her into space kablooey in there.
I think
Anyway,
there's a powerful lobby for that.
yeah. So anyway, our universe is believed to consist mostly of dark matter and dark energy, and we believe protons and neutrons are made of quarks. So this is sounding a lot like our universe. But I mentioned the multiverse earlier, and we do have to acknowledge the possibility that Calvin might be from a parallel universe, because in one strip, he says that a duplicate of him from a parallel universe took his place and did something bad. We're not sure what exactly, but it wasn't him. It was the evil duplicate.
Yeah, and this sort of thing seems to happen to him a lot. So there was another one that was similar where the aliens beam him up to a ship, and then he watches while this robot version of him does all these things like throw away his homework, break a lamp, and things. I just want to point out, I also love the sort of dopey, happy expression the robot version has. So you in this whole strip, you see it just kind of like vapidly but amusingly doing all these naughty things, and Calvin's mother in the background being horrified by it. And of course, Calvin is unjustly framed for this. He takes all the blame when it was really the robot.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's that. There's another one where this one Calvin doesn't exactly get in trouble that we see, but an alien comes down and then like morphs into Calvin's double, and then Calvin runs up and steals the alien spaceship. But then
Yeah.
it seems like school doesn't go as well as it could, and maybe Calvin or a duplicate of Calvin got in trouble. So yeah, it is
Greetings.
a common occurrence.
Greetings. My name is Calvin. Here your lunchbox. Have a good day at school.
I would like that. In fact, that was one that I cut out of the newspaper and that I think I
Nice.
still have somewhere.
Yeah, that's a good one. So Calvin could be from a parallel universe, but I think he's probably from our universe.
Well, it seems like it's right.
Yeah, but whatever universe it is, it must be very similar to ours, and I think we can pinpoint Calvin's galaxy. So, in one story arc, Calvin keeps growing bigger and bigger, and he eventually becomes the size of whatever galaxy he lives in. And then he tumbles through space, eventually coming to a door that leads him back to his room. So, make of that story whatever you will, but he does seem to live in a galaxy. And in one strip, he and Hobbes are looking up at the night sky, and Calvin specifically identifies the Milky Way and refers to it as our galaxy. So I'm pretty convinced Calvin lives somewhere in the Milky Way.
He also has a fairly impressive knowledge of the Milky Way and where we are in the universe, especially for a 6-year-old.
Yeah, when I was 6, I definitely couldn't have pinpointed all the things he did in the night sky, for sure.
Yeah, that's kind of like him hearing about, I want to say Mozart. I don't know if it's
Oh,
identified
yeah.
or not, but the composer wrote his first symphony when he was 4, and Calvin thinks, when I was 4, I think I was toilet trained. So,
Yes, right. But yeah, Calvin's pretty smart. He knows his way around dinosaurs and he knows his way around astronomy very well for a 6-year-old. Now, in that same strip where he identifies the Milky Way, he also says that his solar system is on the edge of the galaxy, which again lines up pretty closely with where our solar system is in the Milky Way. So that's further evidence that Calvin lives not just in the Milky Way, but in our solar system. Additional evidence for that, in one strip, he's looking up at the night sky and he identifies Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, and he laments, and I'm stuck here. So the fact that those planets are visible to the naked eye from Calvin's yard or close to his yard must mean that he lives in our solar system, because there's no way you could see those planets with the naked eye from another solar system.
and also, I just want to say it's kind of cool that he did get to visit Mars later. So,
Yes.
kind of, yeah, he had this lament, but then he was able to rectify that later, at least
Yeah.
in part.
Yeah. He just didn't think about the fact that he had a wagon. He's not stuck here. No.
Yeah, I mean, if you got a wagon and a cardboard box, I mean, you can go anywhere and any when.
Exactly. Yes. So actually, let's talk about that arc where Calvin and Hobbes travel to Mars. I mean, I guess it's possible that they traveled there from some other solar system, but using Occam's razor, I'd say the most parsimonious explanation is that they traveled there from somewhere within our solar system.
That would make sense.
Mostly, I just wanted to use the word parsimonious.
I was thinking, I almost pointed out, but yeah, I was thinking that is a very good word.
Yeah. So, up to this point, are we agreed that Calvin lives in our solar system?
Yes, I think that is a reasonable hypothesis for us to proceed from.
Okay, excellent. But now we've got to pinpoint which part of the solar system he lives in. And I think we can start with the process of elimination. So he probably doesn't live on Jupiter or Venus since he saw them in the night sky. And we know he's not from Mars because, as you say, he traveled to get there in his wagon.
Right.
Yeah, so we can rule those 3 out. Now, there's another strip where Calvin's talking to Susie and she says they have a substitute teacher. And he says, that must mean their real teacher has rocketed back to Saturn to report to her superiors. And that probably means then that he's not from Saturn. If he thinks Miss Wormwood is an alien from Saturn, then, it wouldn't make sense for him to be from Saturn.
Yeah, I mean, that would probably make him a weirdo from another planet, and we know that he's not one of those. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Now, Calvin and Susie also do a report about the planet Mercury. And I mean, I guess it's possible they might have been assigned to do a report about the planet they're from, but the way it's presented, I think probably not. I think they're talking about a different planet in their solar system, not the one they're from.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. And Calvin says that girls should be shipped to Pluto, so he's probably not from there.
I think he says that on multiple occasions, actually. I think there's
Yeah,
a few times where he talks about I think one, they should be shipped to Pluto, and one of the few things girls are good for would be colonizing Pluto.
Right, exactly. So
Yeah, this is a continuing theme with Calvin, especially when it comes to gross.
right. And he's consistent. Pluto, always. So yeah. Now, additionally, when Calvin breaks the faucet, which is one of my all-time favorite stories, but he tries to blame it on aliens from Pluto. So again, if to him aliens are from Pluto, Pluto's probably not his home world.
And I also find that one funny. I agree, that's one of my favorites, but it's funny to me how if he had just told his dad the truth about what happened, I mean, yeah, he might still have been in trouble, but at least it would have been a reasonable explanation. Like, yeah, I was trying to fix the faucet, but I broke it in the process. Like, okay, you may still get punished, but at least your intentions were good and you're not saying crazy stuff about it. So
Yeah.
I don't know, that part always makes me laugh. Just tell him the truth.
Aliens, Dad. No, it was Hobbes. Yeah. So, okay, we've ruled out a bunch of planets. We also have an instance where
We ruled out several planets and a dwarf planet.
good point.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I'm not saying I personally endorse this classification, but if we're going to live up to our usual high standards of scientific excellence here, I think we're going to have to be accurate about that.
That's true. Pluto has been classified as a dwarf planet, and as Gus from Psych would say, that's messed up, right?
Poor, pitiful little Pluto.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I disagree. I think we should still let it be a planet. The case against that is that then we would have to call all these other worlds planets. And my response is, so?
Ooh, okay. So instead of going from 9 to 8, we could go from 9 to dozens potentially.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing.
That would be cool. So wow, look at all the new planets we have. This is amazing.
Yeah, but nobody asked my opinion.
Well, that's probably where they messed up, I think, is what we can conclude here.
Exactly. So we've got one more that we can rule out. He dreams that his parents are aliens from Neptune, which again suggests that he's not from there, because otherwise he wouldn't think of that as being alien. And also, one time while taking a test, he says that Concord could be on Neptune for all he knows. So clearly Neptune is foreign to him. So we've ruled that one out as well.
Right. And just another side note, that's another personal favorite of mine, the one where he dreams his parents are bug-eyed aliens from Neptune.
Yes.
Because the energy of that strip, how chaotic it is, and the art, especially when they first supposedly tear off their mask and Calvin's freaking out trying to get away. That's an all-time classic, I always thought.
Well, and I just like the little detail at the end because they turn him into an Earth Boy waffle, so they're cooking him in a waffle iron, but then it comes back to reality, and it's that his cheek was pressed so hard into his dad's lap that he has corduroy lines on his face.
Exactly. And that's actually happened to me before. I mean, not from corduroy jeans, but I fell asleep in like the guest bedroom of some family friend's house. And the way that the comforter on it was, like when I woke up, there were these like check mark lines in my cheek. So
Yeah,
this is a real thing that happens. I can relate to Calvin here. I didn't dream that I was being turned into waffles, but
that's good.
the physical phenomenon did take place.
Yeah. Now, notably, there are no references in Calvin and Hobbes that I could find to Uranus. So I guess Watterson just didn't want to go for the obvious jokes there, but that does mean we can't definitively rule that one out.
Yeah. But also, that's no reason why we should pass up these jokes. So here we go. No, I'm just kidding. But in all seriousness, though, I do remember one time when I was teaching, I don't remember how this came up, but I had some reason why I needed to mention that planet. So I pronounced it the other way. So I said Uranus.
Mm-hmm.
Then I also told the students, I said, yes, I said Uranus, because if you say it the other way, everybody laughs. And then everybody laughed. So I kind of made the joke without making the joke in that case.
Very good. Yeah.
Thank you. Then one other brief thing. So there was another time where this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, for lack of a better term. So here's a question. Have you seen the movie E.T.?
Oh, I've seen it. It was a long time ago. I don't remember much from it.
Fair enough. I mean, it's been a while for me too, but here's what I do remember. So there's this part in it. So of course we know ET stands for extraterrestrial, and the main character Elliot is saying how he has this alien now. And then there's this obnoxious other kid that's like, Where's he from? Uranus? Get
Mm,
it? Uranus? So, okay, whatever. Hilarious joke, especially if you're a 5-year-old or whatever.
right.
However, one time when I was in French class, I believe this was in junior high sometime, but in any case, part of our education was we're going to watch a movie that we all probably know, but the French version of it. So we get a
Mm,
sense of, oh, here we're hearing the spoken French and things like that. Okay. But we get to that point and they tried to run exactly the same joke, but it was like, où est-il? Uranus? Comprend? Uranus? I remember thinking like, but that joke doesn't work in French. That's
you
the words aren't the same. Ur doesn't mean your in French.
right. I actually had a similar experience in French class in high school
Okay.
specifically.
It must be
Yeah,
a French
so
class thing.
yeah, we were watching Finding Nemo, and there's the part where they're like, "I'm gonna touch the butt."
Okay.
It doesn't work in French.
So yeah, it clearly works in English because it made me laugh just hearing it now. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
all right. So that's yeah. So kind of a pet peeve of mine. Like I guess maybe this is a very specific pet peeve, but like jokes that work in one language or context and trying to import it somewhere else. I remember even as a child just thinking how ridiculous this was. I'm like that
Yeah.
joke doesn't make sense here. Do something different. Come on, but
Nah, they don't want to work that hard.
I guess not. But man,
Yeah.
that's the state of public education, I guess. I'm just kidding. It
Pitiful.
was
Yeah.
all right. But yeah, so silly jokes about what we will more properly call Uranus.
Sure. Yeah. But
Yes.
we can't rule that one out. And there are also other worlds in our solar system. You mentioned dwarf planets. So there's the dwarf planet series, for example, that we can't rule out, or the moons of Jupiter or the moons of Saturn. He could live on any of those. It doesn't specifically rule them out anywhere in the comic. He does say at one point that he wishes he could go to the moon, and his dad wishes that too. So he's
That's a
probably not from Earth's moon.
right.
Yeah. But I think you'll all agree with me that the strongest evidence is that he's probably from Earth. Because when he talks about Miss Wormwood going to Saturn, he also says that the Saturnians are planning to invade Earth. And in the one where he grows to the size of a galaxy, he first grows larger than the planet he's on and falls off of it. And that planet sure looks like Earth. And in one strip, Calvin is dressed as an alien and he calls his mom an Earth female. So,
A pitiful Earth female, to be precise, which always makes me laugh because it's along with a threat to he needs cookies and she's trying to stop him. And so
yeah.
yeah, I always love that one.
Yeah. And there are actually two. There's one where he comes with like his hair spiked up weird, even for Calvin, and says that he calls her an Earth female. And then there's one where he comes as a probe from some planet X13 or something.
That's
And
right. And
yeah,
both involve, yeah, so one involves cookies and one involves chocolate. So it's a similar
yeah,
similar
similar vibes.
scenario. Yeah.
Yeah. But
But yeah,
anyway, in both,
I always really love my mission must not fail. Prepare for annihilation, pitiful Earth female.
go back to go back to Jupiter X, whatever. um,
Those are some great exchanges.
yeah. So that gives us pretty good evidence that he's from Earth. Also, in one Sunday strip, Calvin sneezes and is launched so hard that he breaks, quote, the pole of Earth's gravity. And one time while traveling, trying to go to the future around the year 2000, which was the future at the time, Hobbes
Yeah,
says he hopes old Earth is still around then.
man, remember when the year 2000 was still the future and
Yeah.
it sounded like the future too. I mean, it's like, okay, sure, yeah, 1996 could be the future or whatever. Man, the year 2000,
Yeah.
wow.
Exotic. Yep. Cities
Yeah.
built on clouds, flying cars, all that stuff.
We were supposed to have flying cars by 2015 and hoverboards. And I just want to point out we didn't seem to get either of those.
Well, we live in the wrong timeline, I think.
But that becomes increasingly easy to believe. But
Right?
yeah, but more on that another time, maybe.
Yeah. Now, in another story arc, when winter is coming, Calvin thinks that the sun is going out and that the earth will soon be a cold, lifeless ball. And Dad, in a rare case of giving correct information, explains that the earth's tilt on its axis is what causes the seasons.
Isn't it sad how some people will cling to any preposterous delusion rather than accept the occasional bleak truth?
Yeah, poor dad.
Poor dad.
Yeah. But then it turns out dad was right. Imagine old dad knowing a thing like that.
Crazy.
So, yeah. And when they go to Mars, it's specifically to get away from Earth's pollution. So I think with all this together, it's pretty definitive that Calvin lives on Earth.
That's true. I'll also add to that, when they do encounter the Martian, Calvin says, well, we're just ordinary Earthlings, not weirdos from another planet
Yeah,
like
good point.
like he is. Yeah. And then one more great piece of evidence, when Galaxoid and Nebular show up, they ask to be taken to the supreme Earth potentate, which turns out to be Calvin, at least according to him.
Yeah,
But
what luck.
yeah. Oh, and this, I think before I made a more out of context reference of this line, but kudos to Navigator Nebular. So because he chose the landing site, which was right at the house of the Supreme Earth Potentate,
Yeah,
Calvin.
good job, Nebular.
Good job. Yeah. But so while Calvin may not be entirely truthful about that, he does seem to consistently refer to himself as being from Earth. So yeah, I think you're right. We could probably at least tentatively agree Earth seems to be the ballpark of where the strip takes place.
Yeah, seems to be the best candidate of all the planets in the solar system.
Exactly.
Okay, obviously up to this point, we've been being intentionally silly, but let's look a
You would
little bit
never do that.
on this podcast.
A
Yeah.
little on brand.
So, but let's look a little more closely at where on Earth Calvin probably lives. So, he definitely lives in the Americas and specifically the United States. And we know this because in one strip, he becomes Captain Napalm, Defender of the American Way. Now, I guess he could have been Defender of the American Way living in Japan or something, but seems a little unlikely that that would be the case.
Yeah. I think there's a similar one too where they're going to play war and he says something like, I don't know if he says American or not. He might, but it's something like,
I think he
I'll be
does.
the fearless defender of liberty and you can be the godless communist oppressor or something like that. So I
Right.
forget if there's a specific reference to America there, but it seems at
Yeah.
least implied.
But on a similar note, in another one, he imagines to himself some boy in communist Russia who has only known censorship and oppression, but maybe he's heard about America, a land of freedom and opportunity. And he says, I'd like to meet that little boy and tell him the awful truth about this place. So, this place, presumably being America. And his complaint here is that his parents are making him eat lima beans. So, I can sort of see his point.
Yeah, funnily enough, I actually like lima beans more as a kid than I do now. Now, I wouldn't say I hate them now or anything, but it seems kind of strange to me that my taste buds seem to have gone kind of in the backward direction of how they typically would, or you might expect them to there.
Yeah, that is a little strange.
Yeah, do you have any foods like that?
I can't think of any like that. So, I mean, when I was a kid, I was a very picky eater. Like, I didn't like lasagna, which
Oh,
is
wow.
bizarre.
Yeah,
I
that's
like
surprising.
lasagna now.
Sure.
Uh, yeah. I also, just as a little side story, food aversion. Familiar with that?
Okay, yeah.
If you eat food that makes you sick, then going forward, you tend to not like it. It can be a very strong tendency to not like that food or even related foods.
Right.
This whole psychological thing. Well, when I was a kid, I had to take iron supplements. I was iron deficient, and the only option available for me at my age, because I was too little to swallow pills, was iron drops, which were disgusting.
Oh,
And so my mom put them in chocolate milk, which was a great idea, but it made the chocolate milk taste disgusting. And so
oh.
for years after that, I didn't like chocolate milk specifically. I like chocolate, but not chocolate milk.
Dang, life did you dirty there. I
I
mean,
know.
a
Now
world
I've gotten
without
over it.
chocolate milk. Oh, that's a relief. I'm happy to. Yeah, I feel sorry for anyone who doesn't drink chocolate milk. That's
Yeah,
terrible.
yeah. But to your question, I can't think of any foods that are stereotypically foods that kids don't like that I liked as a kid and don't like as much now. I don't have,
Okay.
I can't think of anything like that.
That doesn't really surprise me. I mean, like I said, it's kind of weird. You think things
Yeah,
are going to go in the other direction. So, There was actually another one where it was kind of like I really liked it as a kid, then I kind of stopped liking it so much, sort of in between, and then got back, and now I
Mm,
like it again. So, and that
okay,
was sweet potatoes, and I want to
interesting.
say, yeah, maybe it was because seeing it like with marshmallows on it, I just thought it was like sweetness overload or something. But yeah, so
Yeah,
that was, I went through a period where I wasn't super fond of those, even though on either side of it, chronologically, I really liked them. So,
hmm, okay.
yeah.
Now, a couple more points of evidence that Calvin is from the United States. He talks about how endorsing products is the American way to express individuality. I like that strip a lot. He says, a good shirt says, my identity is so wrapped up in what I buy that I paid the company to advertise its products.
He kind of
So,
has a point there.
yeah, that,
Especially, I always thought this was kind of strange. Like you see people, and it's not like it's some design or something, and then you say, "Oh, buy such and such company." It'll just say like the name of the corporation. I was like,
yeah,
really? Like, okay, I guess, but
it turns the wearer into a walking corporate billboard.
exactly.
Yeah, which does sound like a fairly American thing, honestly. So, and then when Gross hatches a plan to get Susie with a water balloon, Hobbes is tasked with drawing a map, and he starts with the United States. You see him saying, okay, here's the United States. And then he zooms all the way into their front walk.
And you remember what it is he wants to know about the front walk,
Yeah, he wants to know how many bricks it has.
right? So this is a very detailed map.
Yeah, and it starts with the United States. So their front walk is probably somewhere in the United States, and it has some number of bricks.
All right, so now we're getting somewhere. We're getting some really good clues now.
Yes, but where in the United States? Now,
Okay, good question.
yeah. So, by the way, what state do you live in?
Denial.
I don't suppose I can argue with that. Yeah. Now, just in case anyone's wondering, that is also a Calvin and Hobbes strip. But
Yes.
there are several clues here that pinpoint where Calvin lives within the United States. And this is where, for me, it really gets fun. So, first of all, Calvin and Hobbes commonly catch fireflies in the summer. Now, I'm from the Western United States, and my understanding is that there are fireflies all across the US, including the West, but they definitely are much more common in the Eastern United States. I have never caught a firefly anywhere in the Western United States, but when my family took a trip back to like Illinois, I was able to catch fireflies.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. So we actually lived in New Jersey when I was young, and I distinctly remember seeing and catching fireflies there. That was pretty common, but I don't know that I remember seeing them or catching them anywhere else. Maybe when we lived in the Pacific Northwest, I might have seen them, but I
Mhm.
certainly have much more vivid memories of them in the eastern of the United States than the West.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a pretty good clue that they probably live east of the Mississippi.
Now, aside from that, there are also some places that we can specifically rule out.
Hmm.
So there's one early strip where Calvin wonders where we go when we die, and
Hmm.
Hobbes suggests Pittsburgh. And so
Hmm.
Calvin says, "You mean if we're good or if we're bad?" Okay, now they don't actually settle that question, but it does suggest that Calvin and Hobbes must not live in Pittsburgh.
Right.
And there's
Yeah.
actually a kind of similar strip. Both of these are pretty early on. So they're both in the first
Hmm.
book, just Calvin and Hobbes. They come, I think, within the first few months of the strip. They're pretty early on. But again, a similar setup. And so Calvin asks Hobbes what happens to us when we die. And this time, Hobbes actually has a more specific answer. And what was that?
Okay, I'm not gonna probably get this word perfect, but it's something like I think we play saxophone. We go to New Orleans and play saxophone for an all-girl cabaret.
Exactly. Yeah. So the order was a little different, but that was all the parts. Yeah. He says, I think we play saxophone for an all-girl cabaret in New Orleans.
Okay, all right, yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like Hobbes probably thought about the question a little more since the first time Calvin has it, because now he has a much more definite, confident answer. And we also get a little more of an answer to the sort of value of it too. So Calvin says, "So you believe in heaven?" Hobbes says, "Call it what you like." Okay. So now we have a real, it's not just maybe it's Pittsburgh. I think it's definitely New Orleans playing saxophone for the all girl cabaret. And we're going to call that equivalent to heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which
which
I think it's a little strange also that Calvin calls that heaven, but I guess it was early
yeah,
on.
it was, and this we've mentioned this before, how there's some strips, especially early, where Calvin seems more amenable to the idea of girls being not just good for colonizing Pluto, but
Yeah,
maybe someone you might want to have around sometimes. So
right.
yeah. Okay. So strangely, we had two strips about the afterlife, which give us clues about where Calvin and Hobbes live, or specifically where they don't live. So we can
Right.
conclude that they probably don't live in Pittsburgh, and they probably don't live in New Orleans either. Now, this doesn't rule out entire states, of course. So it's conceivable they could live in some other part of Pennsylvania or Louisiana, just not Pittsburgh or New Orleans.
Right.
That being
Right.
said, there are some states that we can rule out completely.
Okay.
So there's one part in the Snow Goon arc, and you remember where this might be going.
Uh oh, they say something about like avoiding this by going to Florida or something.
Right, and this was something I didn't even think of till like pretty late in preparing for this episode. But it's like, oh yeah, so they Calvin accidentally brings the first Snow Goon to life, and then it starts making no Snow Goons, making an army that seemed to want to kill them. And so Calvin thinks this would be pretty cool if they weren't trying to kill them. And Hobbes says, I vote we make tracks for Florida.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So yeah, I wasn't really thinking about that one before, but yeah, we can rule out Florida.
Right.
And
Right.
there's a couple other states we can rule out. So these next ones come from Calvin's dad explaining things to Calvin. Now, earlier you mentioned that the part about Earth not dying, it's just that the axis is tilted away. That was a rare instance of his dad giving correct information.
Right.
Okay, so these are a little different, but they do give us more clues. So when explaining about the sun, Calvin's dad tells him that it goes out at night and settles in the west, specifically in Arizona near Flagstaff.
Right.
Now, do you
So we
remember
can rule out
what?
Arizona.
Right, we can rule out Arizona, and there's actually another reason why in a second too. But first, do you remember what geological phenomenon is supposedly caused by this?
Oh, that's why the rocks there are so red.
Exactly. So at night, the sun goes out, lands in Arizona near Flagstaff, and that's why the rocks are so red. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a classic Calvin's dad explanation of something.
Right.
Okay. That, yes.
Oh, by the way, there's another one that involves Calvin going to Arizona, though. And so we talked about the one where he grows bigger and bigger. And before that, his own personal gravity reversed polarity
Okay.
as part of that same story arc. That's not the only time that happened. There was another story arc where he just starts floating away and he grabs the tail of a passing jet. And when the jet lands in Phoenix, Arizona, his gravity comes back. So,
Ooh,
yeah,
good catch. I'd forgotten about that one. Okay. Right. So that would also help us rule out at least Phoenix. I mean,
yeah,
theoretically, doing some other part of the state. But okay. So we can rule out Phoenix. We have reason to rule out Arizona, and one more reason to rule out Arizona. So there's one strip where Calvin is pretending to be a pilot who takes a diversion to see the Grand Canyon, and he writes, "Oh, it's like Calvin doesn't want to go to I forget where, but he wants to see the Grand Canyon, so he changes
oh,
the flight path." Actually,
that
does
may
that?
actually give us another clue.
That's right. Does that? I forget. It's like
I think it's
Calvin has
St.
wanted.
Louis.
That might be right. Okay, so we can rule out some St. Louis. There's more than one, but
Yeah.
okay, so there's some St. Louis they probably don't live in, but
Hmm.
also we can rule out another reason to rule out Arizona because he wants to go to the Grand Canyon. All the passengers are happy about this. The narration is like, everyone will be glad that Calvin decided to make this detour. And then we switch to real life and he's kind of sulking in the back of the car. And his mom goes, well, you are not driving, and Arizona is not on the way to the grocery store.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously they're not already in Arizona. Yep. That's a
Right.
good one.
Or it would be on the way to the grocery store. And one way of
Yeah.
thinking of it. Yeah.
Right.
So, listeners, if you live in Arizona, every time you go to the grocery store, Arizona is on the way. That's I guess we'll call that a fun fact. Yes. But in any case, yeah. So we have multiple points of evidence to rule out Arizona.
Which is
Okay.
kind of funny because I'm pretty sure during a lot of the run of the strip, Watterson lived, I guess not in Arizona, but in New Mexico. So he was right in that general vicinity.
That's true. And we also know that a lot of the spaceman spiff landscapes are from canyons in Utah, which is in, a similar area at least.
Right.
Okay. But then again, there's one more instance of dad explaining things to Calvin that also gives us a really good clue.
Mhm.
So this one is about the theory of relativity. And first, what does Calvin ask, and how does his dad explain this?
He says he doesn't understand how the theory of relativity works. He doesn't understand why time goes slower as you go faster.
Okay, right. So that's reasonable question, but fortunately, there's an answer, which is
Well, according to Calvin's dad, is that you keep changing time zones. So if you're, if, he says if you fly to California, you gain 3 hours on a 5 hour flight.
exactly. So a very sensible explanation. You keep gaining hours on the flight. Now, it only works if you go west, he points
Right,
out. Yeah, which that makes a lot more sense than what Calvin's mom said. And Calvin says, yeah, she must be completely off her rocker.
right.
Okay. But for our purposes, this tells us not only that we can rule out California, but we know that Calvin and Hobbes live 5 hours to the east of California.
Yeah. And so we can, I think we can also pinpoint his time zone there because if you gain 3 hours on that flight, going from the Eastern time zone to the Central time zone would be 1 hour gain, to the Mountain time zone would be 2 hours, and to the Pacific time zone would be 3 hours. So I think he lives in the Eastern time zone.
Exactly. And so now, so this, like I said, this is a really good clue. We've not only ruled a place out, we've got a pretty decent ballpark location for where they actually are.
Yeah, yeah. At least we've got the right sector of the United States, and some of the states within that sector, like Florida, ruled out.
Yes.
But
But there's even better evidence.
yes, because when they're coming home from Mars, they got to figure out how to get back to their house. And Calvin recalls from his atlas that they live on the big purple continent, and Hobbes says that their house is by the giant letter E in the word states. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read that strip, I actually checked where the giant letter E is when I was a kid. Did you do anything like that?
I did. It was kind of a long time ago now, but yeah, I remember looking at that too, and it's like, all right, so they must live somewhere around here.
Yeah. And at least on my globe that I looked on, the giant letter E was right in Ohio. Now, that may not be a universal feature. Other maps may lay it out differently, but I think it is pretty common for that E to be right around there. So that was my first real inkling that Calvin might live in Ohio. That's when I really started to feel like, oh, I think I figured it out.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to me that Hobbes refers to their house specifically rather than like our town or something. So it's not, oh yeah, our town or our city is near the giant letter E. It's our house is next to the giant letter E in the United States. So that is some pinpoint accuracy there.
Yeah, they know exactly where their house is. That's really impressive.
No wonder he wanted to know exactly how many bricks there were in the front walk. Like Hobbes is very precise when it comes to this sort of thing.
Yeah, I hope he knows which part of the E they live by.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you could have the northern E or the southern E or the
Yeah,
prong in the middle. Do we call it a
right.
prong?
But corroborating the idea that they might live in Ohio, there are a few strips that refer to buckeyes. So there's one where Calvin finds and comments on how smooth a buckeye is, and Hobbes says, "What are you going to do with it?" And he says, "I'm going to try to dent Susie's skull from 50 feet." And then there's another one where Calvin and Hobbes set up in a tree with a bunch of buckeyes, and they have a sign below the tree that says, "Danger falling buckeyes." Now, Ohio isn't the only place where buckeye trees grow, but it is known as the Buckeye State. So I think it's still a pretty good clue.
It was kind of like the fireflies, right? So
Yeah,
yeah, we have them other places, but it's more common to encounter them in the east like that. So
yeah,
yeah, these are all in a similar way helping us narrow it down.
yeah. But I think the best clue that we have actually comes from outside of the strip. So something Watterson said in the book Sunday Pages 1985 to 1995, he wrote, "In November strips, I always tried to capture that austere gray brambly look that Ohio gets." So, seems to me like in Bill Watterson's mind, Calvin lives in Ohio, and therefore the scenery needs to reflect that at the appropriate time of year.
That would certainly make sense.
Yeah. And notably, Watterson himself is from Ohio. Now, He was actually born in Washington, D.C., but fittingly, his family moved to Ohio when he was 6. So it would make sense for 6-year-old Calvin to live there.
And that's a pretty fun detail too, that when he moved, which regardless of what he did later would be a pretty memorable point in his life and something that would shape him, then we get 6-year-old Calvin. So that's the star of the strip.
Yeah, I mean, and so it makes all kinds of sense that, Bill Watterson knew Ohio growing up. That was his home. And incidentally, that's also where he lived when he started the strip, and that's where he went to college. So I think we're pretty confident that Calvin lives in Ohio, but I think we can zoom in even further. Where in Ohio?
Where
So
does he actually point to?
yeah, exactly. So one sort of broad clue about this is that Dad commutes to work and seems to work in a city with tall buildings, but the family lives somewhere not in that big city. And of course, that could be a lot of places in Ohio or even a lot of places outside Ohio, but it does give us kind of a sense that Calvin at least lives in like a suburb somewhere.
Right. So we've got a cityscape of the downtown and tall buildings, but also the parts of the region with more forests and
Yeah,
large and undeveloped places too.
yeah, exactly. So, continuing with Bill Watterson's own life, when he was 6, they specifically moved to Chagrin Falls, Ohio, which is close to Cleveland, so maybe that's where Dad works. But the fact that Watterson lived there doesn't necessarily mean that that's where Calvin lives. So, do we have any evidence that Calvin lives in Chagrin Falls? Well, there are a couple pieces that seem to support that. First, when Calvin floats away on the balloon, at one point, he says, "There's the town triangle looking down on the town." Now, I don't think most towns have town triangles. I've heard of town squares, maybe, but not usually triangles. But notably, Chagrin Falls does have a town triangle.
Yeah, that's a pretty intriguing clue. And it's not something that reading it as a kid or casually I necessarily picked up on. But when you point it out like that, that's true. Like I haven't really heard of town triangles, like you said, town squares, maybe a town oval or circle even. But
Yeah,
yeah, town triangle, that sounds fairly specific.
yeah. And the fact that Chagrin Falls actually has one, that's
Right.
pretty interesting. Yeah,
That's quite a coincidence, right?
yeah. And then on the back cover of the Essential Calvin and Hobbes, there's a giant Calvin terrorizing a town. And specifically, he's at an intersection of streets that forms a triangle which seems to resemble the Chagrin Falls Town Triangle, including its clock towers. You can actually find pictures of this. And Calvin is also holding a building that resembles the Chagrin Falls popcorn shop, which, specifically because of Calvin and Hobbes, has become somewhat famous even beyond just famous to the residents of that city. Like it's known to Calvin and Hobbes fans.
Exactly. Yeah, which all seems to make a pretty convincing case, I would say.
Yeah. So there you have it, folks. I would say that Calvin and Hobbes probably takes place in Chagrin Falls, Ohio. Now, I'm sorry to say we can't get any more specific than that. I don't think we can pinpoint his specific address, but I think just as Pogo takes place in the real location that is the Okefenokee Swamp, Calvin and Hobbes takes place in the real location that is Chagrin Falls, Ohio.
Which is fun to think about too. And I mean, I can imagine other authors doing this kind of thing. So you use your own surroundings as sort of inspiration or a reference for what you do, but it kind of makes the strip more real too. So it's not just a generic place. I mean, even though it's not specifically named in the strip, it's kind of fun to think, oh yeah, actually here's this real world location. And that probably is where you'd see Calvin and Hobbes running down the street or sledding down a hill or even terrorizing the town, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I think it lines up well with other things that Bill Watterson has said. He said he thinks things are funnier when they're specific rather than general. That's why Dad is a patent attorney and not just some generic white collar worker. So,
Exactly.
and notably, Calvin and Hobbes never specifically calls Dad a patent attorney, but we know that he is a patent attorney. And similarly, Calvin and Hobbes never actually says, "Hey, we're in Chagrin Falls, Ohio," but I think it's pretty clear that's where they are.
I think so.
Yeah.
Absent some other evidence to the contrary, I think we've been very scientific here. I think we can call this hypothesis, if not confirmed, then exceptionally plausible given the evidence.
P-value is less than 0.05.
Ooh, very nice.
Just to be extra nerdy about it.
That's what we do here.
Yeah. So, listeners, if you have any other ideas about clues that tell us something about where Calvin lives, please feel free to send them our way. If you disagree with our assessment, you can let us know. But if you disagree, you're wrong. And
we
anyway,
are peer review, though, is what he's saying. So to
yes,
still be
yeah. No, but no, seriously, you can email us anything, and we love getting the emails that we've been getting. It's been fantastic. It makes my day. You can email us at magiccandh@proton.me. That's magiccandh@proton.me.
And as always, this podcast is completely free and completely ad-free. So we talked about how we were being intentionally silly today, and that's on brand. So if you like that, if you want to be silly with us or just celebrate this amazing comic strip, we'd love to have you join us.
Absolutely. Come along for the ride. Let's go exploring. You've been listening to The Magic of Calvin and Hobbes, a fan celebration. We'll be releasing 40 episodes all throughout the year, from November 18th, 2025 to November 18th, 2026, to celebrate the 40th anniversary. Our intro and outro music is Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, referenced in the Calvin and Hobbes strip published on October 8, 1986. This rendition was performed by the Skidmore College Orchestra and made available under a Creative Commons license on museopen.com. We hope you'll join us next episode for more fun.